There's a confession you've never made, a desire so private you barely acknowledge it yourself, a fantasy that arrives uninvited in those quiet moments between sleep and waking, in that space between who you present yourself to be and what silently pulls at you from below the surface. Lives your shadow self. We all have one, that collection of desires, impulses, and longings we've carefully sealed away. The parts deemed too dangerous, too raw, too contradictory to our carefully constructed identities. The parts we pretend don't exist until they begin to run our lives. The hidden driver. What if the relationship patterns that keep repeating aren't random bad luck? What if the sudden self-sabotage when success is within reach isn't just imposter syndrome? What if the numbness you feel during intimacy isn't simply stress? These aren't random failures. They're messages from what you've buried. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychological thinkers of the 20th century, recognized something modern psychology often overlooks. When we reject aspects of our sexual and emotional nature, they don't disappear. They go underground. And from that subterranean place, they begin to orchestrate our lives in ways we can't control or even comprehend. Jung called it the sexual shadow, not because it's inherently dark, but because we've kept it in darkness. This is your sexual shadow, not just unexpressed desire, but your complete relationship with power, vulnerability, surrender, control, embodiment, and pleasure. Everything you were told was too much, not enough, inappropriate, dangerous, sinful, weak, aggressive, or simply unacceptable, all gathered in the basement of your psyche, growing stronger in the dark. The truth Jung discovered was profound. Your sexual shadow isn't evidence of brokenness. It's evidence of fragmentation. You're not flawed. You're fractured. And what's been exiled wants to come home. The cost of denial. We live in a culture obsessed with sexuality, yet profoundly uncomfortable with genuine desire. We're surrounded by hypersexualized images, but given almost no language to discuss our actual experiences. We're told to be desirable, but shamed for desiring. Told to perform, yet punished for wanting too much or too little, or the wrong things entirely. Think back to when you first sensed the power of your own desire, not the sanitized version you might discuss casually with friends. The raw, unfiltered energy that moved through you before you learned to control it, explain it, or hide it. For most of us, that moment came early, and so did the message that this energy was somehow dangerous, inappropriate, or unacceptable. Maybe the lesson came through direct words. Don't touch there. That's dirty. Good people don't feel that way. Or perhaps it arrived through silence, questions met with awkward pauses, natural curiosity treated as transgression, feelings acknowledged only through absence. The result is a peculiar kind of fragmentation, a split between what we show and what we hide, between the desires we acknowledge and those we disown. You learned that certain parts of yourself belonged in light, others in shadow, that some desires were acceptable, others forbidden, that you must fragment yourself to be worthy of connection. This division isn't merely psychological, it's energetic. It costs something. Every part of yourself you disown requires energy to keep suppressed. Every authentic impulse you intercept before it reaches consciousness demands attention. Every natural response you override taxes your system. This is why so many people feel exhausted despite adequate sleep, bored despite busy lives, empty despite external success. They're spending their life force maintaining internal barriers rather than channeling it toward creation, connection, and aliveness. When that energy is labeled dangerous and pushed into shadow, it doesn't die. It distorts. You know this place. The performances that leave you drained. The encounters where your body is present, but something essential in you is missing. The gnawing sense that aspects of your life are happening to someone else, observed from a distance. This isn't pathology. It's the natural consequence of division, the shadow's formation. No one is born divided. Infants exist in a state of natural wholeness, their desires, needs, and expressions flowing as one integrated stream. The fragmentation begins early, as we learn which aspects of ourselves earn love and which provoke rejection. Perhaps your curiosity ventured into territories adults couldn't navigate. Perhaps your natural sensuality made others uncomfortable. You learned, as we all do, to sort yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. This division isn't a flaw in your development. It's how humans adapt to social requirements. The problem isn't that you developed a shadow. It's that you may have lost awareness of how profoundly it now shapes your life. Because what gets relegated to shadow doesn't go quietly. It transforms. Natural sensuality repressed becomes objectification or shutdown. Authentic power disowned becomes either domination or victimhood. Vulnerability rejected becomes either emotional armor or desperation. The shadow doesn't just store what you've rejected, it distorts it. And eventually these distortions begin directing your life. The shadow's language. Your shadow speaks a language different from your conscious mind. It communicates through attraction and repulsion, through dreams and fantasies, through patterns you can't seem to break despite your best intentions, through people who trigger inexplicably strong reactions. It speaks in the fantasies that simultaneously compel and disturb you. It speaks when you feel unreasonable rage towards someone expressing what you've denied yourself permission to feel. It speaks in what Jung called projection, the unconscious attribution of your disowned qualities onto others. That person whose confidence infuriates you, they're displaying power you've buried. That someone whose pleasure offends you, they're embodying desire you've condemned within yourself. Your reactions aren't random. They're revealing. The myth of control. Most approaches to handling unwanted desires focus on control, suppression, distraction. Jung proposed something radically different: integration, not indulgence, not repression, but conscious relationship, because the shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants recognition. It wants to be brought from darkness into light, not to overtake your life, but to reunite with your conscious self. This is what Jung meant by wholeness, not the elimination of aspects deemed unacceptable, but the integration of all parts into a harmonious, conscious whole. The shadow's power comes not from its content, but from its exile. What you refuse to face gains control over you. This is why Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Those inexplicable attractions, self-sabotaging behaviors, and relationship patterns that seem to happen to you, they're not fate. They're your unacknowledged shadow speaking the only way it can. The cost of division. Living divided exacts a devastating toll, one that accumulates so gradually you might not recognize its weight until it's crushing you. On the surface, you perform the life you believe you should have. You say appropriate things, make appropriate choices, feel appropriate feelings. But beneath that performance, something vital is suffocating. The consequences appear in unexpected places. Creativity that never fully flows because authentic expression requires wholeness. Relationships that remain superficial because true intimacy demands truth. Pleasure that never reaches depth because ecstasy requires surrender. Purpose that feels hollow because meaning emerges from integration. The most devastating cost is what Jung called psychic numbing, a gradual deadening of sensation, emotion, and connection that eventually feels normal. This isn't living, it's existing. The path of reclamation. Your sexual shadow doesn't want control. It wants conversation. It's not asking you to act on every impulse or indulge every fantasy. It's asking for acknowledgement, for understanding, for integration. The shadow's ultimate demand is simple but profound. See me, not with judgment, not with shame, not with the analytical mind that categorizes everything as acceptable or unacceptable, but with curiosity, with compassion, with the understanding that even your most confusing desires contain wisdom when properly understood. The journey toward integration isn't about acting on every impulse or exploring every fantasy. It's about honest recognition, compassionate understanding, and conscious relationship. It begins with a simple but profound question. What have I deemed unacceptable within myself? What desires make me uncomfortable? What emotions do I immediately suppress? What aspects of my nature have I labeled wrong, dangerous, or shameful? What parts of my sexuality have I never allowed myself to acknowledge, even privately? The question isn't academic. It's an invitation to feel, to allow the sensations, emotions, and energies you've been avoiding to finally have space in your awareness, not to act upon them blindly, not to judge them instantly, but to witness them with curiosity rather than fear. This witnessing itself is transformative. What changes is not necessarily the content of your desires, but your relationship to them. The shame begins to dissolve. The compulsiveness begins to settle. The power they held through exile begins to transform into energy you can consciously direct. Beyond performance, we live in a culture of unprecedented sexual performance pressure. Not just the pressure to perform physically, but to perform the right identity, the right desires, the right level of liberation or restraint, the right relationship to pleasure. We're constantly evaluating ourselves. Am I desirable enough, experienced enough, pure enough, open enough, controlled enough, normal enough? This constant self-evaluation and adjustment isn't freedom, it's exhaustion. True liberation comes not from performing sexuality better, but from releasing the performance entirely, from allowing yourself to be exactly as you are, with all your complexities, contradictions, and unique expressions. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means ceasing the constant internal war between who you are and who you think you should be. It means recognizing that your worth isn't tied to how you experience or express desire. It means understanding that wholeness includes all of you, not just the parts deemed acceptable by family, religion, culture, or your own wounded judgment. The invitation. Your sexual shadow contains the energy of life itself, the vital force that fuels creativity, connection, pleasure, and purpose. When this energy remains split off, you experience what Jung called the divided life, going through motions without full presence, achieving without fulfillment, connecting without depth. Integration changes everything. Relationships transform from performances into authentic expressions. Creativity flows from genuine inspiration rather than effort. Work becomes an extension of purpose rather than just security. Pleasure deepens from momentary relief to embodied joy. This journey isn't easy. It requires courage to face what you've hidden from yourself. It demands compassion for the younger you who created these divisions to survive. It calls for discernment about which aspects of your shadow to express and which to simply acknowledge with understanding. But the alternative, continuing to live divided, exacts a far greater cost. The cost of relationships where you're never fully known. The cost of sexuality that never reaches its potential for connection and joy. The cost of creative energy trapped in the endless task of self-suppression. The cost of a life that feels somehow incomplete, regardless of external accomplishments. The choice. Every day, you stand at a crossroads between continued fragmentation and the journey toward wholeness. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you already are, beneath the adaptations, performances, and protections. It's about gathering all the exiled parts of yourself and welcoming them home. Not to act out every impulse, but to end the war within yourself, to redirect the enormous energy spent on internal conflict toward creation, connection, and contribution instead. Your sexual shadow isn't your enemy. It's the exiled part of yourself waiting to be recognized, understood, and finally integrated into conscious relationship. The path begins with a single step, the willingness to see what you've been hiding from yourself. Will you take that step? If this message resonates in the depths of your being, subscribe now for more insights that speak the truths others leave in silence. Share with someone who needs this permission to begin their own journey toward wholeness. The time for living divided is over. Your complete self is waiting.